They screened out several phone calls that people made on behalf of Dante, trying to be his voice, and they ignored it.
That woman believes that her 2-year-old nephew would still be alive if Child Protective Services had paid closer attention. Now, the last couple of years, nearly half of the children who died from abuse and neglect in Pennsylvania have been known to child welfare. Now, leading up to some of those deaths, children and youth agencies received multiple reports of suspected neglect or non-serious injury, but chose not to investigate. Fox 43's Rachel Yankunis reveals the holes in Pennsylvania's child welfare system.
County Children and Youth Services received multiple calls of suspected neglect in the case of 2-year-old Dante Mullinex. But almost every time, there were no services provided, there were no follow-ups, and after a few months, Dante died from abuse. Fox 43 reveals how cases like this are happening all over the state.
They could have, but they didn't.
Sarah Mullinex reads through her 2-year-old nephew's medical reports from hospital visits, wondering how caseworkers missed the signs that were so clear to her.
The nurse suspects trauma and neglect.
In September 2018, Dante Mullinex died from traumatic brain injury with strangulation and suffocation. A York man is facing trial for his death. His mother, Sarah's sister, charged with endangering the welfare of a child. But Dante's death underlines a larger problem that reaches all corners of the state.
The truth needs to come out. Things need to change. Kids are dying, and their job is to protect children and be their voice, and they're not doing it.
Before Dante died, children and youth agencies received multiple calls for General Protective Services, or GPS, reports of suspected neglect, inappropriate care, and minor injuries. Caseworkers screened out many reports without investigation. Sarah had even filed an emergency complaint for custody.
If they would have acted when they started getting phone calls, yes, he would be still alive.
Fox 43 reveals this process of screening out reports of suspected child neglect happens often across the state. We dug through 320 reports of child abuse. Within the last 3 years alone, 115 children died, 205 children nearly died. 40% of those cases had previous GPS calls that caseworkers either screened out or deemed invalid. These reports of suspected neglect are not released to law enforcement. Whether or not a caseworker decides to investigate, they don't have to give police access to GPS reports. It's a concern for Cumberland County District Attorney Skip Ebert, who currently has 8 pending homicide cases open involving young children.
Child dies at 6 weeks old, 1 year, 5.5 months, 2.5 months, 4 months old, 6 weeks old. That's really unbelievable.
In order to gain access to these Child Protective Services reports, Ebert plans to use the powers of a grand jury to subpoena those records.
Their interpretation and their solicitor feels that these are, when it's General Protective Services, that it's protected and we're here to try to, make this family better and everything like that. I'm worrying about the ones where it's repeated and maybe the worker changes and I forgot about the one 6 months ago, but now there's another one, and that keeps building. That's not a good sign in my book.
A lot of times they're understaffed and they just have so many cases coming in. But do you think that the cases are properly investigated?
I know those workers and their heart's in the right place. Whether or not they have enough resources to deal with, I'm not sure.
Doctors say child abuse has become a public health concern. We visited Penn State Children's Hospital to talk with child abuse pediatrician Dr. Lori Frazier. Dr. Frazier works closely with Child Protective Services and police in thousands of cases.
There's a clear-cut link between child abuse, child maltreatment, and health behaviors in adults and early death and disability. Clear-cut link.
At Penn State Health Center for the Protection of Children, Dr. Frazier is pioneering methods of detecting, treating, and preventing child abuse.
Nobody wants to wake up the next morning and wish they'd made a report on a child because they read in the news that child was further harmed or even killed.
In Dante's case, some may argue he fell through the cracks of Pennsylvania's child welfare system. To Dante's family, that would be a grave misjudgment.
They obviously didn't let Dante fall through a crack that was like a crater, because they were involved the whole way up to his death. They were there.
Caseworkers can screen out GPS reports for a number of reasons, including insufficient information, they contacted the family by phone, or made one face-to-face contact and no further action is required. We asked the Department of Human Services whether they're aware of how often this is happening. They told us they needed more time to respond to our questions, so we will, of course, follow up on this story. Fox 43 reveals issues that affect you and your family to keep you informed. Do you have a tip that needs to be investigated or documents we should dig into? Send us a confidential news tip at Fox43 Reveals at fox43.com.